Thank you so much for joining us for our encore presentation of Transform Your Culture, the 5 Pillars of Strategy Execution. My name is Nellie Miller, and I'm the Director of Marketing at MPOWR Envision. Before we begin, I just want to share a few housekeeping logistics up front. As you're using the chat, and we've got Florida now joining us too. Hi, Florida. Please use the chat throughout our conversation today. If you have a question, an observation, or a comment, we would love to hear from you, and we will get to those throughout our conversation. You will receive a recording after today's presentation, so you can watch it on demand and or share it with some colleagues who may not have been able to join us. We also have some future discussions coming up in this series, and I'll share more about the next one near the end of our conversation today. So joining me today are 2 colleagues of mine that I really enjoy working with. The first is Andrea Gibbs, our Senior Strategy Executive. Andrea has more than 2 decades of helping facilitate planning sessions, working with clients to help create a business plan that is motivational and achievable. In addition to teaching at the graduate level, she really understands the importance of solid communication and team collaboration. And so she's a big believer in the effective culture on an organization and works with every client to understand their unique capabilities and goals. She actually helped us develop our MPOWR 5 pillars, which you'll hear more about in just a minute. And she believes in the power of engaging the organization at all levels in both plan creation and achievement. Hi, Andrea. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Nellie. How are you? I'm glad to be here.
I'm great. I'm so glad you're here. Also joining us is Brittany Ray, a talented member of our marketing department and team, and she's behind the scenes helping us produce the event, and we really appreciate all the work that she's doing. Thank you, Brittany.
Thank you.
So as we think about today's conversation, we all have some type of organizational culture. You know, maybe you've inherited a culture, maybe you're looking to develop a new one since you're starting a new organization, and so you need to create that foundational culture. Or maybe you know you need your culture to evolve, and you're the change agent to do that, but you just don't know where to start. At MPOWR, we believe there's a strong connection between culture and strategy. If your culture doesn't support your strategy, it's certainly not going to support the realization or the execution of your strategy. So culture and strategy execution go hand in hand. But when we talk about a culture of strategy execution, what do we really mean? So Andrea, I'd love for you to kick us off today and start our conversation with really defining what does it mean to have a culture of strategy execution?
Well, Nellie, I think, one of the most important things is in a culture of strategy execution, organizational leadership knows their purpose. They know their why, and they help create a culture where the individuals in the organization are invested in that purpose. And therefore, they're invested in the strategy goals. And because they see their why, because they are invested in the goals, they can also see how they play a part in the organizational success.
That sounds, I know we talk a lot about that concept with our clients and also internally at our organization. So I think that really helps set the tone for today's conversation. So thank you for those comments, Andrea. But we'd like to go ahead and ask all of you, our audience, some questions just to understand where you are in your strategic journey. So we're going to ask a couple poll questions, and the question's going to come up on your screen. And we're just going to ask you to answer the question. So here's the first one. When your organization formulates strategy plans, do you get more than senior leadership involved? Do you get them involved frequently, sometimes, or never? Okay, we'll just wait for everyone to answer the question, and I know Brittany's going to show the answers in just a moment. Okay, here are our answers. Andrea, what do you think about these answers?
Oh, wow. 70% at sometimes, 30% at frequently, and 0% at never. That surprises me a little bit, but it's encouraging.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
I would agree. I would definitely agree. I think there's definitely some good things happening at these organizations, and so we want to kind of keep going. So now we're going to ask another question. Kind of the same topic, but just a little different spin on it. So we just talked about formulating your strategy. So now when your organization executes strategy plans, do you get more than senior leadership involved? Is it frequently, sometimes, or never?
I think what's interesting in these types of questions is if you would have asked them 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, you probably would have gotten some very different answers. So um, organizations are moving in this more distributed direction, which I think is really healthy.
That's very exciting to see and hear. Yes. Okay, we'll just take a moment as people are finishing their answers. Okay.
75 and 25, a little bit of difference, but not much. So that tells me, and a little bit of difference from the previous one, rather, that tells me that people are really getting their whole organization, when they say frequently getting, not only in the formulation, but also in the execution, their whole organization, that's a really positive trend.
Absolutely. Well, thank you to you all for answering our questions. Let's go ahead and move on with our agenda. And we've talked about the 5 pillars. So Andrea, take us through the 5 pillars of a culture of strategy execution.
Well, kind of the theme we've been running up to this point is that strategy really does strategic execution rather, and strategy execution belongs to everyone, and you can't make it happen unless people feel that they're part of the direction and that they're energized. So you have to solicit ideas from a variety of different places, and you also have to, as either part of the leadership or part of, perhaps if you're not in the leadership team, part of your department's leadership, you very much have to be able to speak on a regular basis about strategy and where your organization is going and how the things that people are doing fit into the strategy. I used to have a boss who had a sign on her desk that said, "Is what I'm doing now or what I'm about to do going to get me closer to my strategic goals?" And so I think it's critical to be able to communicate that, and to be able to, once you've communicated it, allow the organization to then take action and move forward on that particular type of strategy.
And Andrea, speaking of communication, Dwight has shared with all of us that the pandemic has forced us to communicate more effectively. Would you agree with that?
I would. I think what I'm reading a lot of anyway is that the communication, the written communication, and people's written communication is really starting to ratchet up, and people are learning how to be clearer as they write. They're watching tone. They're using lots of emojis when tone maybe come across as flat. They're using emojis to help them communicate properly to their colleagues. So I would totally agree with that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dwight, for that comment.
Absolutely. And so let's like break down each one of the 5 pillars. Let's first go into cohesive leadership. What does this mean? I think cohesive leadership, the most important thing that we want to ask of our leaders, again, whether you're part of the leadership team or you're part of leadership within your department, it's very important to have the leadership set that strategic direction. And once they set that direction, align the resources that go with that set direction, and ensure that with mission and vision, your mission being your why or what good for whom, and your values, you want to reinforce those things with culture.
You know, I know we often talk too about, specifically on this pillar, how important mission, vision, and values is to your strategy that then ultimately allows you to execute your strategy. But talk about how important those pieces are. I know they're on the screen here, but tell us more about how foundational they are to your strategy.
I call these the foundational statements. That is, your mission is your purpose, the where you're going, who you are, why you're doing what you're doing. If you want to make an analogy, an automobile analogy, it's the road you're on,
Okay.
right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the road you're taking, and then the values are the guardrails on either side, or the shoulder, if you will, on either side of the road. They're the things that are your non-negotiables. We're going for our goal. We're going to serve our mission. But while we're doing that, We're going to have a set of rules that will guide us. Things will absolutely do and things will absolutely not do. And those have to be reinforced with your culture.
Those guardrails really help give boundaries, right? Because we can't necessarily tell our entire organization what to do and how to act and how to actually do their job. We can tell them how to behave, right? Those guardrails help them think about how to be more autonomous and to make decisions within those boundaries. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well said. Well said. And so once you've done that and you have your mission and your values, then you want to think about how do we involve as many people as possible. And one of the ways we like to do that at Power is we take assessments of our clients, and we help their leadership ask throughout the organization, what do you believe is our role? How can we deliver our product or our service best? So you want to nurture the curiosity of what others think and do it sincerely. And you want to do it not only from the top of the organization down, but you want to do it laterally as well. And then once you get that feedback, you want to listen. I've got to be careful. I don't want to mute myself. You want to listen. And when you listen and when you do those kinds of things, you want to then incorporate the feedback you've gotten from your organization to make sure that you're headed in a direction that the rest of the organization buys into. Because as we said, as I said up there, if you're having everybody get involved, many hands make light work.
Absolutely. This is such a powerful pillar, but it can be a little overwhelming. So where does an organization start to start involving many or all?
I think what you really have to do, and we talked about leadership, but I think also the other thing that you want to make sure that you do is involve the influencers, and
Mm.
everybody knows who's those people are in the organization. They may have positional power, but they also have what we call personal power, which is they're the people that people turn to when they are looking for guidance. They're the people that mentor other people. They're the people that carry a great deal of credibility throughout the organization. You want to use those people and get them on your team as well. So, because they can help you carry the message as well.
That's an interesting take. That really helps. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. Um, let's go to our next pillar. Our next pillar is engagement. And I think the important part about engagement, and everybody's talking about it. I mean, you've heard this, right? When people talk about an engaged workforce, it's common, and people are recognizing that without engagement and without people being truly feeling a sense of meaning in their work, they tend to show up, and as people put it, they tend to be a pulse, a heartbeat, and that's it. And that's not who you want working for the organization. You want to get people engaged, and so that's how you work to show everyone and to demonstrate where they fit in and how they're a part of your success. And it's kind of the difference between just showing up and actually finding solutions for your organization. So not only do you get people engaged, but then you get their buy-in. And it's so important. Buy-in is so important.
And just like 2020 and the pandemic has really affected communication engagement, this is a pillar that has really come to the forefront in regards to the pandemic and how we're working right now. Is that correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, for an example, I worked with a client that was a state university medical college, and because it was a public university, it had a lot of stakeholders throughout, not only the staff at the college, but within the community itself. And in order to be successful, it had to have the support of the community. So when we went to do strategy planning, we literally involved 100, somewhere between 130 and 140 people in
Wow.
strategy planning. And it was unbelievable. I'd never done anything that large, but I learned a great deal. And what I learned as we did all these breakout rooms, and then we came back together and we discussed our results, everybody saw everybody else's results. And all of a sudden we built this common knowledge of what we had to do to move the organization forward, so that when we went out to actually execute our strategic plan, we had the support of the community.
That is really interesting. And what I like about that example, Andrea, is sometimes we all think about who's in our organization, making sure the engagement's there, but thinking broader of all of our stakeholders, maybe who aren't necessarily in the day-to-day of our organization, but who we are influencing and whose influence we need. So that's a great example. Wow.
Exactly, exactly. So anyway, that was one of my most salient experiences
It
with
sounds that way.
engagement, and it really it was powerful.
Yeah.
So, okay, the next pillar that we talked about, and we've talked about this before, is clear communication. And in organizations, large, small, medium, any kind of organization, a civic organization, a business organization, a not-for-profit, organizations throughout, all the way down to the smallest organization, which would be the family. Clear communication is critical. And I'm sure a lot of people, when they think about the smallest unit, is, you know, the communication they have with their partner or their siblings or their parents. You want to make sure that it's as clear as possible, and that it's as frequent as possible, and that within an organization, that you not only communicate within your department well, but, as you know, to make sure that those silos are knocked down. You want to be able to communicate outside the department and outside locations and outside disciplines. So very, very important.
As a member of a marketing department, I can say that this pillar speaks very highly to me, and I see its value so much in all that we do. But I love that you've drawn out the inter versus the intra, and how
Yeah.
important those different types of communication is to this work with strategy and culture. Can you give us an example, another client that you've worked with that has really been able to focus on that intra communication?
I had one client that wanted to do strategy, but before they were able to do strategy, they had to look at their operations and say, are our operations functioning as smoothly as they could? And what they found was that their communications between departments were broken. And so in order to be ready to execute their strategy, they had to fix their communication paths first. So
Okay.
very, very important.
I can see why that added to the clear and focused element that you have added to this slide as well.
Well, and you know, in marketing, what's the rule, Nellie? How many times do people have
You're
to
going to
see a
put me on the
message?
spot. It's many times, right? I
It's
mean, you can never ever stop saying your message and being consistent with it for sure.
exactly. So, and then let's move to our final pillar, which we call distributed decision making and action taking. This is the organization coming from the bottom up. So if leadership sets the direction at the top and sets the why and the purpose and the values, then it then tells the organization all the way down to the bottom, the lateral part of the organization, here's where we're going. How do you think it's best to get there? And then allowing them to not only make the decisions for the initiatives that they'll put into place, but to take the actions necessary to make those initiatives happen. Very, very important. And one of the most important parts of this is to allow for failure. We have organizations that have traditionally pointed at failure and said, oh my gosh, failure, instead of saying, failure, what do we learn? And it's so important. It allows you to be able to when people are taking actions, making decisions and taking actions and moving as they see fit, they're able to be much more agile, and you're able to shift and change much quicker than an organization that waits for permissions.
Yeah, so well said. That failure, for learning from failure, I know it plays into what we do, and we're always trying to certainly learn from our experiences. So I think that's a huge piece of this one for sure. As I think about the pillars, Andrea, you know, they all have their specific value and the role within a culture of strategy execution. But when you are talking to an organization who says to you, oh my goodness, we need help with all of the pillars, where do we start? What's your advice for that type of an organization?
Well, I think, Nellie, the most important thing is is to realize you can't do it all at once. If you try to, you'll get overwhelmed and people will get discouraged. And I think the most important thing is to take some of the things that you're already doing fairly well and make incremental changes where you can see a difference and people will get then encouraged. So what I like to say is that you want to move the needle in certain key areas where people can see advancement. That allows them to say, we made progress, now let's try this. And so you basically make incremental small changes that together over time, they really add up. And again, this begins with leadership. Leadership has to be able to identify those things and then engage the people with distributed decision making and action taking, engage the people involved to say, how can we solve this problem better? And then work with their influencers to make those changes smooth and to reinforce and repeat the messages about the changes that need to be made to move through and execute on those particular changes.
Sounds like it's an evolution, just like when we approach strategy and in your strategic journey, it's an evolution too. So work
Very
on these
much so.
pillars is the same thing. So,
Very much
well,
so.
thank you, Andrea, so much.
Of
Uh,
course.
we have a lot of other resources that we can share with your organization. So I encourage you to visit our website, MPOWR.com. There's two on the screen that I can highlight. We have a strategy execution calculator to answer the question, how much is poor strategy execution costing you? But we also have a wonderful collection of blogs. Andrea has written several, and there's one on the screen here that she has written for us. It's still kind of the new year, and so there's some great books, strategy books that she's recommending for your organization to consider as you are proceeding on your strategic journey. As I mentioned in the beginning, we also want to share our next event in the Culture of Strategy Execution digital series. So later this month on February 24th, we'll be having a really great conversation about project versus strategy planning and how to prioritize strategically tactical goals. That's something that we really focus on. And I know, Andrea, you'll be back with one of our colleagues to talk about that.
Looking
Very
forward to it.
important conversation. We at MPOWR develop and make strategy execution software to help people achieve their strategic plans and ultimately their strategic goals. Our software creates transparency, alignment, and visibility around an organization's strategy and its execution. Ultimately, it helps create a culture of strategy execution. But in addition to our software, we also have some consulting services, coaching and facilitation, and Andrea leads our team for all of those services. So we would love to keep talking about this conversation, take it offline. So I encourage you to reach out to Andrea, connect with her on LinkedIn, keep the conversation going if you have a question or a comment, or if your organization needs some help with your culture, we are here to help as you, again, proceed on your strategic journey.
Hey, Nellie, do we have any questions in the chat? We've got a little bit of time. We've got about 4 minutes left. Do you see any questions we might be able to answer or?
I don't see any, but I think this is a great time for people.
Okay.
If you're watching and you have a question, we would love to see it in the chat. I know Brittany has just shared the RSVP link. So if you'd like to register for the February 24th virtual conversation, we welcome you to do that.
Fabulous, fabulous.
Yeah. But here's a question for our audience. Andrea, you made a comment earlier in your remarks about a former colleague who had a sign on her desk and it asked a very important question. And so we wanted to pose that question to all of you. Is what I'm doing or about to do going to get me closer to my strategic goals? We hope the answer is yes. If it's not, we can certainly help. But we think that question is so powerful, and I love that you shared it, Andrea. Thanks for doing that.
I think it's important to ask because as many of us know who are on the call, you get caught up in the day-to-day, don't you? You get going and
Absolutely.
you start your day and you have this task and this task and this task. And it's very easy to begin doing all those things and forget about asking yourself, is this contributing to something I really want to accomplish in the long term? Or is this just something I need to get done? And if it is just something, if it's not relevant or doesn't necessarily feed into at least a part of my strategy, I should at least ask myself, why am I doing it?
And I think that's where I'm looking forward to our next conversation about the strategically tactical goals, because how you can tie some of your daily work to your overall strategy is really that missing link.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think when you begin to have that, it's a mindset, and it's certainly a part of the culture in an organization. And I know it's a challenge nowadays because everybody's work from home. But there's certain things you can do even on video to get that culture of, what am I doing today? How is it contributing to our goals? And how am I making a difference?
Mhm.
Because everybody does want that meaning when they, even when they're working from home, but they want that meaning in their organizations, in their work, in their jobs. How am I contributing to the organization's success?
And I would say maybe even more so now. If there is a remote dispersed workforce, people are really asking to connect themselves to the organization even more than ever.
Absolutely.
So on that note, and I think again, this question, I think we could all put it on our desks like your former colleague did. So I think that's a great takeaway as well. So, but on that note, I don't see any questions, but again, please reach out to us for any other comments or observations that you have. We would love to hear more about your organizations and how you're approaching your cultures. Andrea, I want to thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Nellie. Thanks for having me. I always enjoy talking about culture. I think it's really, really important. We have a really good one at Envision and at MPOWR, and I hope that as many people as possible can take the idea that working on their culture, working on their values, and working on their why really goes a long way toward executing on their strategy.
Absolutely. And I do want to give a huge shout out. Thank you to Brittany for all of her work behind the scenes. Thank you so
Thanks,
much,
Britt.
Brittany. And I want to thank all of you. Thank you for joining us. We know your time is very valuable, so we really appreciate you joining us today. We look forward to seeing you next time and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much.